Now, I say a little of what I know because I know a lot about the future. I've been forecasting for a living for over half a century. And so, you know, that's a great thing. When you're listening to a futurist, you want to listen to an old futurist. We are humble, right? We have made 10 and 20-year forecasts and then lived out to the end of them and found that, wow, that didn't turn out the way I thought at all. Let me go back and do this again, right? And after a while, like anything else, if you do it often enough, you get better at it. And I think after 50 years, I've gotten pretty good at it. Now, the first thing that I have to tell you that I've learned in 50 years of forecasting is that the most interesting things about the future simply can't be forecast. It's terrible, but that's the truth of it. Political developments, stock market behavior, economic performance, scientific breakthroughs, environmental events, absolutely not forecastable. And the reason is because they are complex phenomena. Now, as was pointed out by Paul earlier, in your vision project, it starts right out by saying the core purpose of CPAs is to help the clients make sense out of a complex and changing world. Now, until earlier this year, I thought, and indeed many of you may have thought, that complexity was simply a synonym for complicated, right? And then I was asked to edit a volume of papers under the title Complexopacity. And complexopacity was all about managing complex phenomena. And we put the invitation out for papers, and what we got back was a lot of people who were specialists in complexity and who disabused us of the notion that complex and complicated were the same things at all. They said, no. Complicated is merely a system or a process that has a whole bunch of variables in it. Like a jet engine with 75,000 parts in one engine, or a TCMP audit, right? These are merely complicated, they said. But what we know about complex systems is that they have, first of all, infinite numbers of variables. They involve risk and probability. Because they have infinite variables, we never can be sure of how they'll turn out. They also are full of uncertainty because they involve people, and people are not predictable. So, okay, you throw that in. And then along comes Nicholas Taleb, and he says complex systems involve emergence, novelty, like the black swans that he wrote about, saying that there was nothing in the past that could let you infer the possibility of this sudden event appearing in front of you. That's complexity. And another thing complexity is, it's ambiguous. The man who defined ambiguous for us, of course, was the former Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, who talked about these are the things you don't know, okay? And it's absolutely correct, all right? And all of those are features of complex systems. So the fact is that we cannot explain or manage or intuit complexity in the future. As a consequence of which, we know that there's going to be a lot of complex events that will occur that we think might occur, but we just can't be sure of if they're going to occur and when it's going to occur. And a lot of people say, well, what good are you as a futurist if you can't tell me for certain whether these things are going to happen? While we can't make sense of complexity, we can make sense of change. And the principal message I'm going to have for you this morning is what we know about the change that we can be certain is going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years. Because if you're masters of that, if you understand the changes that are going to happen, then when complex random events happen, you'll be much better grounded to be able to roll with the punch and take advantage of those unpredictable complexities. So what are the changes that we know about that we can forecast? These are the things that are driven by the large-scale inertial forces in the world around us. The biggest is demographics. You know, this huge population of the globe, the huge population of the United States that can be forecast in terms of its growth rates and its makeup with great precision for at least 15 years out. You know, for 15 years out, all the adults, people are going to be adults for the next 15 years, have already been born, right? There's a long lead time in producing adults. We don't start that way. So that says we can tell you what the makeup of the labor force is going to be by age, by race, by gender, 15 years out. That's valuable information about the future. We can tell you what the markets are going to look like 15 years out. So, useful stuff. Econometric forecast. We can't tell you how well the economy will perform, but we sure can tell you how fast it will grow and which sectors will rise and which will fall. And the BLS gives us a 10-year forecast every 2 years that has always been bang-on accurate. And you want to pay attention to that as an anchor for understanding the future. And I'll show you some of the data from BLS in a bit. Finally, technological forecasts. We know what kinds of technology will be in the mass marketplace up to 7 or 8 years from now, because anything that's going to be in the mass market is already in the pipeline. And if you read the technical journals, you know what's on the way. And you put these three inertial forces together, and that gives us what we call in the futures business the knowable future. And that's mostly what I want to talk to you about this morning. So I'm going to whisk you down the tunnel of data and tell you what we know about your operating environment over the next 5 to 10 years. Starting with demographics. I like this roller coaster chart. It shows the changing age makeup of the U.S. population from 1950 to 2020, right? So it's got built-in information about the future. And it tells us, you know, that's when the baby boomers first arrived on the scene, when they were 16 to 24, and then here's where they became 25 to 34, 35 to 44, 45 to 54. Uh-oh, what happened then? They began to add to the 55 to 64-year age group, way down here. Why is that group so small back in the 50s? Well, if you were 55 to 64 back in 1990, you were born in the 1930s. And the economic conditions back in the 30s were so terrible that the birth rates plunged by more than a third. So there weren't very many of us turned out back in the 1930s. Fortunately, the quality was unusually high. So the nation was able to survive in spite of that small scale thing. But so I've spent my entire life being down here in these valleys, all these low points. But what happens in 2015? Suddenly, one age group shoots out of the pack and becomes the dominant age group in America. It's over 65-year-olds. For the first time in my life, I will be in a majority age group. And more of us will, indeed, because we know for certain that by 2015, they will be the largest group, and by 2020, they'll make up about a quarter of the adult population in America is going to be over 65. Well, that's something to think about.